Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Unraveling Politics. This is a show where I discuss political news of the day and I provide my analysis in a way that you can understand. So, thank you for joining me on this special episode. I very much appreciate it. Normally, I don't release episodes in midweek, but we got major news on Sunday. As I was recording the last episode, I had to re-record it multiple times, and I didn't get to go in full depth as much as I would have liked to. So, I'm sure you've heard by now, Biden is no longer running for president. It will now be Harris. So, what is going on the last few days? There will be, first of all, speaking of Harris, is Democrats' chances of winning the election have gone up significantly, at least I would say. Maybe not significantly, but it's gone up a great amount. They're in a much better position now than they were even just a week ago. Over $100 million have been raised. 50 million in the first 24 hours, and those were not from mega donors. Those were from small donations. That was in 24 hours. The mega donors are coming, but the Democrats are in a very, very good spot. Now, we have to look at who's going to be the next vice president, which I'm going to get, or who could be the next vice president. I'm going to get into that in a little bit. So, here, let's first bring up the nominee will be officially voted on August 7th, but now Harris is pretty much the nominee because she has the majority of pledged delegates that are now going to support her. As of today, there are now two candidates left in the race for vice president. Mark Kelly, a senator from Arizona, he was first elected in 2020. Harris knows him well and likes him. He's also a former astronaut, and his wife is Gabby Giffords, who was a congresswoman. She's not a congresswoman anymore because she was shot in the head, I believe, or near the head, and she was not able to perform her duty. So she's a lot better now than she was then, but she is, I believe, severely disabled. So the point is, they have a lot of star power in the Democratic Party. If you ask me, I think it's going to be Mark Kelly. Then again, Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, is also another good choice. I would say Josh Shapiro electorally is probably the best candidate. And the reason I say that is because that could lock up Pennsylvania. I live in Pennsylvania. And he has plenty of good experience. He was the Attorney General from 2017 to 2013. He was in the House of Representatives for 7 years in the 2000s and 2010s. And he was also on the Montgomery County Board of Commissions as their chair for 4 years. So he's kind of risen through the ranks in politics in Pennsylvania. The only downside for me is I wouldn't want to see him run for vice president because he's only in his first term. If you're only in your first term, it's kind of a bad move, especially, and he just became governor like 2 years ago. And from what I understand, he's also not a very charismatic person. He's a very efficient politician. He's good at getting things done and making deals. He's a good administrator, but it would be hard for him to rally people. So I think Josh Shapiro still, though, despite that, would be the best electorally. However, I'm thinking it's going to be Mark Kelly because, one, that would lock up the state of Arizona for sure. And Josh Shapiro would also lock up Pennsylvania. Well, maybe not lock it up, but it would definitely increase the chances. But she also knows Mark Kelly a lot better than she knows Kamala Harris, meaning than she knows Josh Shapiro. And I think she's going to value the personal relationship between president and vice president much more. So that would be my thinking. Anyway, that is the Veep stakes. There had Andy Beshear and Roy Cooper on there. I would think the best choice would have been Roy Cooper, but who's governor of North Carolina. But from what I've read, he's not on the list anymore. They've narrowed it down to those two, which I've already mentioned. Trump now is the oldest nominee in history, and that's probably his big disadvantage. He's the oldest nominee in history. He's younger than Biden, yes, but Biden's not running for president anymore. And also, he donated $6,000 to Kamala Harris for when she ran for re-election as California Attorney General in 2014. So that's kind of interesting. Anyway, we should know, back to vice president, sorry, let me say this real quick. We should know by the end of next week who the vice president's going to be or would be the nominee. And Harris has gotten wide support, as I said, enough delegates. All 24 Democratic governors support her. Pretty much every major leader in Congress has announced support or will soon. So, if you want a professional opinion, which is not mine, a former 538 blogger, Nate Silver, he's very, very accurate. He got almost every state in 2012 and 2008 right. He's independent now. He doesn't work with 538 anymore. But he says, when he was asked, does he think that the chances of Biden or the Democrats winning has increased, he said, quote unquote, I think so. He put Biden at less than 25%. He puts Kamala at just under 50, maybe 40 to 50%. When I said a couple weeks ago, I said Biden had between a 20 and 30% chance of winning. So we're kind of mostly in agreement. I guess I gave a little bit more advantage to him, more advantage to Biden than Nate Silver did. So he's a very accurate guy. I absolutely trust everything he says. I think he's a great political analyst. He dives deep into the polling. I highly recommend you subscribe to his newsletter if that's something you can afford. If not, there's plenty of public stuff to read as well. So let's take a look at some of the individual polls. Sorry, you may hear my mouse in the background. So general election, Trump versus Harris. It is still a little bit early because a lot of the polls were hypothetical. And how people hypothetically vote is different than how people actually vote. So for example, if you are asked, in 2024, who would you want to be president? Michelle Obama and Lauren Boebert. Lauren Boebert, if you don't know who she is, you gotta look her up. People would say that differently in a hypothetical poll than people would actually vote for. It's hard to explain, but it's gotta be a real choice for people to think. So a lot of these polls, older polls, I wouldn't take into account. On Real Clear Politics, they have, even though they're taking polls as far back as the 7th of July, so as of right now. So the average is Trump 1.7. Remember, Biden was, when it was Trump versus Biden, it was over 3%. So that's definitely an improvement. 7.5, so if we take out all to 723, that's yesterday as I'm recording this. So if you take out all those older polls, everything before 721, you would have Trump plus 2, Harris plus 2, Trump plus 1, Trump plus 3. So that's about, on average, I'm not going to be able to calculate it. It's about Trump plus 1, maybe 1.25. So it is getting a little bit better. Harris has definitely got a decent shot at winning, and I think if she gets a good vice president, then that could really seal the deal. Because get this, Trump really had no convention bounce or even assassination bounce. He's pretty flat, and what I interpret from that is Trump's support is probably pretty stable. He has a floor of support. People are going to support him. People who are going to vote for him are going to vote for him at this point. People who are Harris support might go up and down because people don't know her quite as well. But if you look at Joe Biden versus Trump on Real Clear Politics, this was before they deleted it, and let me bring it, or before they stopped updating it, Trump was at 47.9%. If you look at Trump versus Harris, it's 47.6%. It's nearly identical. Trump's support is basically flat. So that would make me think, assuming the polls are accurate, Trump's going to get at least 47 to 48% of the vote. That's pretty much what he's going to get. He's going to be stuck around there. So that would mean the Democratic nominee, in this case, Kamala Harris, would have to get really at least 49% to 50% to comfortably win in that scenario. Because if Harris only wins by 1% nationally on the popular vote, then Trump wins. Because Republicans have an advantage in the Electoral College. And I could probably explain that in an in-depth episode later. But they do have a built-in advantage of about 1 to 2 to 3%, depending on who you ask. I would say it's about 2. So Harris is definitely performing a bit better. By the way, Harris's number, she's at 45.9. That does include the hypotheticals. And then Biden was at 44.8. So that's a gain of 1.1, which is not a lot. Still within the margin of error. And by the way, when I say margin of error, it's a range of error. So if a poll says somebody has 45% support, margin of error, if it's 3%, usually 3% is pretty standard. That means their actual support could be between 42 and 48. So when I say something's within the margin of error, then that usually means that one candidate and another candidate, it could, even though one's ahead, it could be the other way around because of polling errors. Polling is not perfect, as everybody knows. Now, let me go over 2 swing states. This could be a bit more concerning on an individual level. Pennsylvania, Trump versus Harris. There was only one poll out since she became the nominee, and that was by amgreatness /Ensor. There's only 600 600 sample size, so I would not consider, and a margin of error of 4%, so I would not consider this to be a good poll. But if this is accurate, then Trump has a lead of 2%. And then here's another poll. There's only one since Landmark Communications with a margin of error, of 5%. Only 400 sample size, so I wouldn't really pay much attention to this. Trump +1. So, by the way, I don't really notice any polls that have less than 1,000. I don't really take into account any of that. And then, let me see, President Biden's job approval, even though he's not running for president anymore, it is still important because incumbent presidents, especially if it's a vice president, like in this situation, can still reflect on the Democrat or Republican nominee, depending on who's the president. So Biden's actually ticked up a little bit. It's at 40%. His disapproval is at 57%, so that's -17. And then I can look up Kamala Harris job approval. As I said, I usually use Real Clear Politics. I've used it for years. So her job approval as of right now is -13. So her approval is 5 points better. It's definitely higher. Get this though, even though the gap is the gap between the two is smaller, her actual approval rating is 38.7%, and the president's is at 40%. So she's actually she's less approved of than the president. Now, the reason the gap is smaller is because only 52% of Americans disapprove of her, while 57% disapprove of Biden. So there's less wiggle room with Biden, and that's why Kamala has a better chance of swinging the election, because there are more undecided voters that could switch either way. All right. One of the last things I'll mention about polling is the generic ballot. We talk a lot about who's going to become president. Truthfully, nobody knows, but let's take a look at the generic ballot. It is basically generic Republican versus generic Democrat. So this is no incumbents, no nothing. People are basically asked, for Congress, are you going to vote for a Democrat or are you going to vote for a Republican? Most of the time, Republicans have had a narrow lead. And the gap has never been more than like 2.5%. Democrats have taken a lead occasionally, but right now it's at 0.5%. Republicans have a very, very small lead. So, and most of these sample sizes are well over 1,000, which is good. Let me see. So right now, as I said, Republicans have a lead of 0.4. In 2022, this was in what was supposed to be a Republican wave year, and it wasn't. Republicans at this time in 2022 had a lead in the generic ballot of about 1.8, about 2%. It was about 2.5 to 2%. This time in 2020, which is more comparable, the Democrats had a lead of over 8%. So in 2020, let me write this down. In 2020, Democrats had a lead of 8% at this time and then. And in 2022, Republicans had a lead of 2.5%. Right now, they have a lead of 0.4. So, considering in 2022, Republicans underperformed, and in 2020, Democrats underperformed. And then let's take a look at 2018 and 2016. These are other important elections. So 2018, at this time, this was during a Democratic wave year. They led by about 7%, the Democrats, I mean. And in 2016, this time, they led, the polls don't go back that far. Okay, so 2016, we don't know. We won't take into account 2016. So the point is, what is the lesson here? The incumbent advantage is overstated, meaning the Democrats underperformed in 2020 and 2018. The Republicans underperformed in 2020 and, 2022. So we're going to have to see. My guess would mean the Republicans are overperforming in the polls. So what does that mean? That means Democrats are probably have a better shot at retaining certain seats in Congress. Now, generic ballot is a little bit wonky because nobody votes generically for president. It's just you vote for an incumbent or you vote for specific politicians. So that's why I don't normally focus too much on the generic ballot, but it does give you an overall picture. Anyway, my predictions for Congress at this point will be a Republican majority in the Senate of about 52 seats, 52 to 48. And then in the House, I would expect a narrow Republican majority at this point because it seems like Trump is doing better in the polls. All right. Last thing I wanted to mention is this is very good news for the Democrats. So while Harris's approval of vice president has the chance of boosting her up, Trump has done the opposite. J.D. Vance is the least liked a non-incumbent vice president nominee since George Bush Sr. in 1980, following their respective convention in either the DNC or the RNC. Why is this the case? Well, I'm not entirely sure, but I can tell you this. This was predictable. One of my friends, as I said, I called him a demographic expert in the last episode, or it was the previous one. He, the same guy, noticed that he ran well behind Trump when he ran for Senate in 2022. He's way worse than an average Ohio Republican. He was supposed to win by a certain amount, and he won by way less. And here's how bad it is. The average Republican approval in July/August after the convention of a Republican or Democratic nominee was 19%, plus 19. So that means 19% more people, or there's a 19% lead. And that was the average since 2000. That was all that was given to me. Vance is -6. So he is 25 points below the average. Now, as I said, this might not be a big deal because Democrats their nominee might not be, their vice president might not be great either. And as I said, Trump's approval is pretty flat. His approval, as well as the amount of support he has, doesn't seem to change very much. He is 25 points lower. That means 25% of that's a whole quarter of the electorate liking you less than other VP nominees. So that means Pence was more popular. Biden himself was more popular. Kamala was more popular. Kerry was more popular. Gore was more popular. Walter Mondale was more popular. I'm missing one. Dan Quayle, he's very forgettable. Dan Quayle, he was more popular. All of them were more popular at this point during their election cycles than J.D. Vance was. And that shows you just how terrible of a candidate J.D. Vance might turn out to be. At first, I didn't think he was so bad, but now that I'm seeing what he is, he might actually be the worst candidate that Trump has picked. Well, Trump's only picked 2 people. One of the worst vice presidential nominees in recent history. He is the least prepared. He is also, I would say, even Kamala Harris was more prepared to be vice president than he was. He is. And he's also the least liked, as I've been explaining this whole time. Is this going to be a huge deal? Maybe, maybe not. We'll have to see. It's definitely dragging down the Republican ticket at a time when he was supposed to boost them. And if you remember my episode that I released on Sunday, I said Vance does not appeal to any demographic that Trump doesn't already appeal to. And that could be his big flaw. If Kamala Harris can pick somebody who can appeal to a demographic like suburban women or white working class people or black people in the inner cities or black people in general, she is not very popular from her time as Attorney General of California, which reminds me I have a clip to play for you in just a moment all about that. And also, she could try to pick somebody that will appeal to Hispanics or somebody that will appeal to Cubans in South Florida, or really any demographic group. If she can pick somebody who can appeal to demographic, then her chances of winning go way up, and I would say it's even more likely than Trump. However, I'm starting to feel a trend. My gut is often wrong, I'll admit. I can feel a trend that this race has changed, and has changed dramatically in the last week. And I think most people would agree with me. Before we go, I have one more clip to play. This is from the 2020 debate, or it's actually 2019, from the 2020 election cycle. Tulsi Gabbard was completely destroying Kamala Harris, and this was probably one of the major reasons Kamala Harris was not the presidential nominee 4 years ago. And if you haven't watched this before, then I think you're going to enjoy it. You're going to watch the vice president getting completely destroyed. Here you go.
Congresswoman Gabbard, you took issue with Senator Harris confronting Vice President Biden at the last debate. You called it a, quote, false accusation that Joe Biden is a racist. What's your response?
I want to bring the conversation back to the broken criminal justice system
that is disproportionately negatively impacting Black and brown people all across this country today. Now, Senator Harris says she's proud of her record as a prosecutor and that she'll be a prosecutor president, but I'm deeply concerned about this record. There are too many examples to cite, but she put over 1,500 people in jail for marijuana violations and then laughed about it when she was asked if she ever smoked marijuana. She blocked evidence. She blocked evidence that would have freed an innocent man from death row until the courts forced her to do so. She kept people in prison beyond their sentences to use them as cheap labor for the state of California. And she fought to keep cash bail system in place that impacts poor people in the worst kind of way.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Senator Harris, your response.
As the elected Attorney General of California, I did the work of significantly reforming the criminal justice system of a state of 40 million people, which became a national model for the work that needs to be done. And I am proud of that work. And I am proud of making a decision to not just give fancy speeches or be in a legislative body and give speeches on the floor, but actually doing the work of being in the position to use the power that I had to reform a system that is badly in need of reform. That is why we created initiatives that were about re-entering former offenders and getting them counseling. It is why, and because I know that criminal justice system is so broken, that I am an advocate for what we need to do to not only decriminalize, but legalize marijuana in the United States.
I want to bring Congresswoman Gabbard back in. Your response.
The bottom line is, Senator Harris, when you are in a position to make a difference and an impact in these people's lives, you did not. And worse yet, in the case of those who were on death row, innocent people, you actually blocked evidence from being revealed that would have freed them until you were forced to do so. There is no excuse for that. And the people who suffered under your reign as prosecutor, you owe them an apology.
Senator Harris.
My entire career, I have been personally opposed to the death penalty, and that has never changed. And I dare anybody who is in a position to make that decision, to face the people I have faced, to say, I will not seek the death penalty. That is my background. That is my work. I am proud of it. I think you can judge people by when they are under fire, and it's not about some fancy opinion on a stage, but when they're in the position to actually make a decision, what do they do? When I was in the position of having to decide whether or not to seek a death penalty on cases I prosecuted, I made a very difficult decision that was not popular to not seek the death penalty. History shows that, and I am proud of those decisions.
As you can see, that was pretty embarrassing, and she had basically no response. So that could come back to haunt her. Kamala's not a perfect candidate. She's far from perfect. I'll tell you, I'm not a big fan of her. Just like I'm still a double hater. Hate Trump and Biden. Now I hate Harris too. Not actually hate them, like real hate, but like hate them as a presidential candidate. So I'm still a double hater. But my decision, I'll tell you this though. The shakeup in this election has not changed the party who I am going to vote for. I'm not going to say who I'm going to vote for. Maybe one day I will, but not today. It has not changed my decision. I made that decision a few months ago, and it has still not changed. So that's just a personal take. Anyway, thank you for listening to this special episode. On Monday, there will not be a regular episode. There is going to be, instead, I'm going to be uploading an episode about what Robert Kennedy is running for president on. The audio in there is a little bit not as great as I would have liked, but I was not in a great recording situation. We're going to listen to that on Monday, and hopefully we're going to learn a little bit something about RFK. Anyway, I want to thank you for listening and joining me on this special episode. Hopefully you learned something or at least got your gears turning. And otherwise, thanks for listening and have a great day. Bye-bye.